Hello and welcome to the Collective Conspiracy Show. Again, thank you, Andrew, for coming on. Show regular.
Yeah, I'm.
You are. Today we're going to talk about money and the finance system and the banking system. But a little disclaimer before we start: neither of us profess to be experts on this topic. It's a topic that I'm extremely interested in, and I know Andrew's dabbled here and there. So we've buffed up a little bit for today's show. But we just wanted to take it in a different direction instead of keep talking about COVID and all that stuff. So we wanted to talk about another thing that controls everyday life, and that's money. So before I bring Andrew in, I thought it would be quite prudent to just give a bit of background, really, into how money is manipulated and how, particularly the Federal Reserve, and I know that's in America, but they have a big part to play on the world stage. How that came into play. I mean, really, if you think about the War of Independence in America, and Andrew, just jump in if at any point, but the War of Independence in America, that was started really because there were many factors, but one of them was that they used to trade with interest-free money in America, and then King George III heard about this, didn't like it, so told them they had to start lending essentially or loaning money from the Central Bank of England, which then would have meant the American government then had to tax its people in order to afford to pay back the interest rates to the Central Bank of England. And the Americans didn't like that. So the Americans kicked up a big fuss, and for many other reasons as well, of course, and started a war on the English. And we all know how that goes. 1776, America wins its independence. Unfortunately, around about 200 or so years later, they fall into the same trap. And the very reason that they fought for independence, they fall back into again. Now, what happened is they used to have a dollar, and that dollar was backed by gold. And you could see on the old dollar notes, if you look for a dollar note that's pre-1933, it will mention the word gold on. And anything after 1933, it doesn't say anything. I think it says legal tender, which basically means it's worth nothing. It's worth what they want it to be worth. And around about 1907, there were a few, obviously you've got your Rothschilds, your Rockefellers, your JP Morgans, these kind of people, these big bankers. They tried to push for a central bank for years, but they kept failing. And what they were doing was they wanted to essentially monopolize all of the money into the few instead of it being spread out over different banks. So they kept trying to push this central bank, but the government weren't having it. The people of America were obviously wary. They fought a war for this. They didn't really want anything like this. So they had to do a classic problem reaction solution. And we all know what that is now. A problem reaction solution is where they create a problem to get a reaction from the public, so then they can offer a solution to the problem that they created in the first place, and they get what they want. And the public feel like they're getting what they want as well. So what they did was they spread a rumor, particularly JP Morgan, around about 1907, spread a rumor around America that all of some banks were going bust, basically, and they were all going insolvent. So a lot of people panicked and started to take their money out of the banks, and all these banks closed down. They couldn't afford to basically keep going anymore. Once the banks closed down, these shrewd businessmen, these bankers that I've mentioned, then went and brought all of these banks at a low price, brought all the shares, brought all the stocks, monopolized, as I've said, and now they've got control. And that was really key. And then in 1910, they had a meeting on Jekyll Island, and I think it was Woodrow Wilson who was the president-to-be. And in 1910, there was a meeting between bankers, not lawmakers. And that's really important to stress. It was between bankers. And the bankers basically wrote there, it was the Federal Reserve Act. That's what they wrote. And shortly after, Woodrow Wilson was elected president. And again, important to note that he was backed by a bunch of rich bankers. And that goes on today. Anyone today that doesn't believe that people that get into power look at the Tories and all their sponsors that, kind of push for them and promote them. It was these people that got Woodrow Wilson into power. And it's thought that he basically said, if you support me, if you give me the money, I will bring that act into fruition. I will bring it into law. And so he did. But he did it at a crucial time. He did it just before Christmas, when most of Congress were on holiday. They were spending time with their family. They broke up, essentially, and it was voted through. And he made the Federal Reserve Act law. That was in 1913. And then what happened after that was the Federal Reserve now is essentially a central bank. They're unregulated. They make their own policies. They're not really governed by the government. They just create money. So from 1914 to 1919, they're now pumping money into the system. You want a loan, you've got it. Bad credit, you've got it. Low interest rates. You want 10 grand, have 20 grand. They were really pumping money in. And that led to the 1920s where they had what they call the boom. And what they can do is for the Federal Reserve, because they're essentially creating their own money, they can put more money out into the economy to create booms. Then they can tighten the money so they can put less loans out, decline more people for loans, which then makes it harder for people to get by. People can't, in modern days, buy houses or get new cars. The economy crashes, we enter a recession. And that's how easily they can manipulate these kind of things. And what happens is eventually in about 1929, this happened. So they pulled the money, essentially. They asked for all of the money back from their loans. People couldn't afford to do it. And there was a huge, huge crash. And then we entered the Depression of 1930. And that is really, in a nutshell, the illegal, in my opinion, creation of the Federal Reserve and how it's still going on today.
That's Andrew. Right. Yeah, and I was just going to sort of throw in a couple of thoughts from that because it was Andrew Jackson, who was the US president, who tried to get rid of the central bank. In fact, he did. He kicked them out. I think they tried to set up a central bank. And as Kieran was saying before, I'm not an expert on this, but he tried to set up a central bank and he kicked them out. And fast forwarding a bit past from where Kieran got to, Kennedy was starting to try and tackle the issue, wasn't he?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
One of the few or lesser known things about Kennedy is that he issued some redback notes, didn't he? I think he issued, was it 5,000 of them, a small number of redback notes, which were government-backed currency. They weren't captured by the Federal Reserve. So some people reckon that was another reason why he was a marked man, because he started to try and tackle the central banking model, which had been, the US was obviously 50 years into by then, or just about. And then likening as well, you mentioned the 1920s. One thing I remember hearing a good few years ago now is that there are some parallels between the 1920s and sort of like the 1990s, because it was the advent of radio. And so everyone was getting radio in their homes, and businesses and stuff. And it was a bit like the internet now. And there was this whole sort of change of way people got information, and that sort of affected the way people did business, of course. So there was all that feeding into it. And then, of course, what happened after 29? Yeah, we had the Great Depression. And what came out of that? Well, the Depression and that climate, the economic climate, was, of course, one of the reasons why Hitler came to power. Which, of course, resulted in the Second World War, which, again, was run by the bankers, essentially, who funded both sides, as they always do.
Yeah.
So, they were able to manipulate that whole situation to consolidate their power base.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because people don't know that up until something like 1938, Hitler's forwarding address was Prescott Bush in New York. If you wanted to write to Adolf Hitler, you had to write to Prescott Bush, and yes, that's Granddaddy Bush in New York. And Hitler, I mean, you think about it, the Germans were suffering their own kind of economic crisis post-World War One. People were taking a wheelbarrow full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. How did an Austrian guy raise enough money to for tanks, for guns, for uniforms, to raise an army the size of the Nazis? Where did he get that money from? And the railroads that lead into Auschwitz were made by Carnegie Steel, which was an American company. And you're right that the bankers, in my opinion, the bankers created Hitler because they were scared of communism. Because, of course, communism threatens capitalism, and capitalism is how they've made their money. So they engineered this puppet into power to fight communism. and they didn't care really whether he won or not, because effectively they would win. Whether Hitler stuck to the plan and whether Hitler deviated from it a little bit and thought, I don't want to be a puppet anymore, I'm going to do my own thing, is by the by. But he was originally put in place, I believe, to fight for the bankers.
Yeah, and there was an interesting thing that's come out recently. The sequel to Fall of Cabal, this Janet Osabard video, where she did the Fall of Cabal, I think January this year. I think she got posted or something. A very interesting documentary. I don't agree with all of what's in it, but there's a lot of it I do. And then she's done this sequel, and I watched I think the third episode just came out a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about Hitler in that, and they'd done some research, and they sort of go through this in the video. It's only like half an hour. I recommend people look it up on BitChute and have a watch of it. It is very interesting. But they basically, suggested, and with the research behind it, that Hitler's father, I think it was, or his grandfather, was the illegitimate son of Rothschild. So Hitler was actually a Rothschild, but not, an illegitimate. I think he was the son of an illegitimate Rothschild. I think they don't overtly say that. I think if you follow what their research says, that's what he was. So he did have a connection to one of the banking families as in his blood, in his bloodline, according to them anyway. And I thought that was very interesting. So they set up this fractional reserve system, which essentially meant, that they can just say, oh, well, as long as we've got 10% of the whatever it is fund in the bank, we can lend out, if we've got £10,000, it means we can lend out, £100,000 in loans, because, we can call that in any time, and not everyone's going to withdraw their savings.
So they think. So they think, yeah.
And so that was a system they set up, and that had been developed, I think, from the way that some of the bankers in the because of course the whole banking model, I think there were various stages of its development, one of which was very successfully developed by the Knights Templar, wasn't it? Because they, I think, were bankers of some kind back in the, I don't know, I might get the dates wrong, but in the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries. They become quite wealthy, and so they loaned their money out, didn't they?
They became wealthy because of the treasures that they used to steal, I imagine, and the places they used to loot and stuff like that.
Right, and then so they developed their own banking models, and that I think then developed from that later on by the people that came after them, as it were. So and also the other thing, you going back to the fractional reserve, the Federal Reserve, I should say. There's this story about the Titanic, isn't there? That and I think that's in the Janet Osabard film video. That they were two or three. There was J.P. Morgan, and there was Goldman Sachs, or the people that eventually developed Goldman Sachs as a bank. They all got together, and then there were a couple of other big wigs, but they didn't want to go along with this.
That's right, yeah.
Scheme. They had a different idea, or they wanted to do a slightly different version. They didn't want to create the Federal Reserve, or whatever it was initially called. And apparently, by some weird coincidence, they went down on the Titanic.
Yeah.
Or the Olympic, depending on which ship
that's a different show. That's a different show.
Right, exactly.
But I mean, I think what really there, a lot of people say, really, would they really kill? But I don't know the number on the Titanic, but hundreds of people just to kill two people. And look at 9/11. Damn right they would. It's a classic problem, reaction, solution again. So the reason the Federal Reserve was created was because after the first economic crash around 1907, they promised the American people, look, we want to put this central bank in place to alleviate any more issues. We don't have to worry about any recessions because it will be regulated. It will all be centralized, and it's all coming from one place. We won't have banks acting independently. It will all be coming from one place. That's what they promised the American people, and that was in 1913 when it was established, and no less than 20 years later, they're already in they'd had little ones before, but now they're in a major depression in the 1930s. So it didn't take long, and it was around about 1933. It was 1933 that they basically changed the dollar, so it was no longer backed by gold. So essentially, you could go into a shop and you could buy with gold as long as it had that worth. And what that meant was that the dollar was worth as much as what the gold market was, and they didn't want that. They wanted the dollar to be worth as much as they told you it was worth, and so they wanted to get rid of the gold. So in 1933, they told the American public that everybody had, and this was under the threat of a 10-year jail sentence if they didn't, had to hand in any gold bullion that they owned, essentially giving away all of their wealth, all of their worth. They had to hand it in exchange for a dollar that no longer said backed by gold, but it now said legal tender. And what that means is it's worth whatever they want it to be worth. So when people say that you can use monopoly money as long as they tell you it's worth something, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, somebody put in the comments that this is in David Icke's book. Yeah, I think he's covered quite a lot of this, and there are other authors as well. I mean, we're just sort of going through the basics, and certainly for myself, I may make certain mistakes about dates or names or whatever, because it's not something I've deeply put a focus on. But nevertheless, it is important because it's, I mean, again, if you look at that, I think it's Ring of Power, another of these good video series. This Ring of Power was done a few years ago, where they talk about, the way that the world is controlled, and like Washington is meant to be the center of global military control, or one of the biggest centers. London is the financial control, and Rome is essentially the religious control center. And I think there's, a good element of truth in that. And again, that might even be in David Icke's book as well. I'm not claiming that this is something I've come up with, as I say. But all these things are important, and they are all conjoined together. And so I think we were saying just before we started recording, if you can get a handle on some of these topics, getting a handle on one teaches you something about the other, typically. So it's worth doing. And I think people have I've heard people saying what's going on right now, is to do with the currency system as well. It's that is a factor of what they're trying to do. And, we'll probably talk about that a bit later, not trying to jump too far ahead. But, I think it becomes quite obvious that this is all linked together when if you research this stuff for more than about 6 months and you do it, with sufficient interest and sufficient, energy, you will find the same sorts of things as they're all being linked together, like we're just saying.
Yeah. I mean, just to go back to that comment there about being in David Icke's book, we said at the start that we're not experts in this, and I know a lot of people that are tuning into this will probably. This will be the first they've really get to hear about this kind of thing. So if we encourage people to go away and do some, deep research and to go and read a David Icke book or to watch these programs or these documentaries that we're mentioning, then great. That's what we're here for.
Exactly.
We get 1 hour. We can't really go into too much detail. We cover a lot of topics every week or every couple of weeks.
And I think on that theme, some of these I've read or watched and some I haven't, but the names that come to mind is The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is Geodore Griffith's book. That I think came out, that's years old. That's probably like 30, 40 years old by now. I think he wrote a lot of this up. And that was because that talks about that meeting in 1910, was it, Kieran? The Jekyll Island you just mentioned earlier on.
The meeting was 1910 at Jekyll Island, yeah.
Yeah, so that's when I think the plot was hatched, wasn't it, or formed? And
well, it started around 1907-ish, and then
right.
But they wrote the bill.
Right.
They wrote the bill in 1910, and I think Woodrow Wilson came into power 1913. Off the top of my head.
Right. So people can read that Jekyll Island book. You might even be able to get a PDF of it online. But Geodore Griffin did a pretty sterling job on that, if that's not too much of a pun. The other thing, there's Ben Stiller. He's another good author and commentator on this. I think he made this video. It's probably in the 1980s or 1990s. I think it's called the Money money sellers or the money makers
Okay.
or something. I forget the exact title, and he's still knocking around. I think I think he has a regular sort of blog or something. Ben Stiller is his name.
Not the comedian,
No,
not the
no,
actor.
no, no. Not the guy who played um, Hutch in the Starsky and Hutch movie that
Yeah,
they
no,
did. It's not him.
definitely not him. No.
So
I see.
there's
Sorry, I've just seen a comment about Bilderberg. I mean, that's a good thing to talk about. I mean, the
yeah.
Bilderberg meetings they happen every year, I think, and
Mm,
this is where the shadow government, in my opinion, meet. I mean, so many presidents and prime ministers before they were presidents and prime ministers go to these meetings, and it's where they basically plan and outline the direction that the world is going to be steered into, really,
mm,
where they lay down agenda. So Bilderberg is an absolutely huge thing. We'll get onto that in a sec, but I want to go back to fractional reserve lending, which you
mm,
spoke about there, Andrew. So yeah, I mean, as Andrew mentioned, fractional reserve, for those that don't know what that is, it essentially means that a bank can loan out money that isn't theirs, and that's how banks make their profits. So a bank will, if you come into my bank I've just opened, you come in and you give me £1,000, you deposit £1,000. That means I can now lend £900 out to someone that comes in for a loan, but I have to keep 10%. So I have to keep £100, and that's just in case somebody wants to come in and withdraw the £100. Of course, we're talking about banks who have millions of pounds, so it's a much larger scale. But just to keep it simple, so I've now lent £900 to Joe Bloggs, who's that £900 isn't mine to lend. So if that person who's just deposited that thousand comes in the next day and asks for it back, I can't give it them. And that's what would happen is if everybody around the world went into the bank and asked for their money back for what they have deposited, they wouldn't be able to get it back because that money essentially doesn't exist. And this is how banks make money, because if that I would deposit £1,000 for a ridiculously low interest rate, I will get on that £1,000. I mean, particularly now, it's not even worth thinking about. But when I loan out that £900, I will charge a ridiculously high interest rate on that £900. Therefore, I am making even more money. And that means the more and then if someone comes in and deposits another £1,000, that's another £900 I can lend out. So this is how they make their money. And they're essentially lending you money that doesn't exist, while you now sweat your ass off just to pay the interest on the money that never existed in the first place. I mean, it's an absolute, in my opinion, it's an absolute scam how they can do this, and it's regulated. That they're told that they can do this. This isn't them pushing their luck, trying to get away with it. Really, this is what they're told that they can do.
absolutely. And this whole idea of having lending out this money they haven't got, that again changes the whole way the banking system works. Because then they can essentially, because when one bank lends to another, that's when things get even more crazy.
Yeah,
Because one bank can lend £100 to another, and then they can, or £1,000 to another, and then they can then lend that £1,000 out another, 10 times or whatever the fractional reserve figure is, and then within that, then they might lend that to another bank, and so it goes.
yeah,
So you get this essentially this money. It's the other video that you can watch, and there's two of these, is called Money as Debt, I think it is. They're
okay,
two videos which go into explaining this concept in a bit more detail, and how we live in a debt-based money system, and you get, I mean, a couple of years ago, probably longer than that now, in the UK. Anybody that's outside the UK, and they probably have lots of similar things in the US, is we have the student loans company, I think, was sold off. And then you talk about buying, they talk about they bought all that debt. And this kind of turns my head into a bit of a spin. How do you buy debt?
yeah, yeah,
And so you get into this whole system where the money it's not real. It's just numbers now, and particularly now. I mean, at least maybe sort of 40, 50 years ago, you had a proportion of this money was actually tokenized in physical form,
yeah,
with notes or accounts written down or kept in paper books. But now we don't really have paper books anymore, and some of us don't even have bank statements anymore. We just have a number inside a computer.
Yeah.
That's
all it is.
That's the same for me. I work for a university, and that, I do some work for them, and then at the end of the month, this number on my bank account just goes up by a certain amount. And you think that's real, because of course you can trade that for other things, but beyond that, it's not real. It only becomes real when you invest confidence in it that it is real. Whether you are a consumer or a producer, it doesn't matter. If you agree that system, whatever it is, the system of exchanging twigs or matchsticks or figures on a computer screen that apparently come from a trustworthy source, then that becomes the real monetary system. It doesn't really matter what it's made of, as long as you as two trading partners agree that it has value. Then it works, and of course it's open to manipulation.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about the lending. I mean, let's kind of go back to the government and the Federal Reserve, and of course we have a central bank in England, and any country that doesn't have a central bank, for some reason, America seems to want to invade them. Draw your own lines there. But what these banks do is that they will lend money to the government, of course, and that's what we're seeing now with the furlough scheme. This money's coming from somewhere, and then the only way that the government can pay back the ridiculous interest rates on that loan is to get another loan. So they get another loan from the same banks that they've just took the loan from, or they raise taxes, which is probably a drop in the ocean in terms of how much they actually owe back, but they will raise taxes. That we see that all the time. And then so they'll raise taxes, but then they need to take out another loan as well. So it's these constant loan. And when people say the banks don't run the world, give your head a wobble. Of course the banks run the world, because I'm not sure who it was that said this. It might have been Rothschild or someone, but there's two ways to enslave a country, and that's by the sword and by debt. And modern day slavery is debt. We don't have chains anymore. We don't work in fields. We work in offices, and we work in supermarkets, and we have credit cards. They're the new chain. And this is really how they manipulate us and control us through money. What do you mean you don't have a mortgage? You should have a mortgage. You're 30 years old. Why haven't you got a mortgage? And people think, yes, I own my own house now. No, you don't. And you don't own it for another 30 years. Because the bank can come and take it away from you at any point. So there's this false illusion, that you're doing well, that you're wealthy, but you're wealthy within an illusion.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this idea there of getting, once they get you to buy into the illusion, then you can give up your resources and property for their fake money, and so they've got control of the resources. And certainly
it's the assets. Yeah, it's the assets.
Yeah, the assets, exactly. Yeah. And that we've heard about this happening with obviously very valuable assets like gold mines in third world countries or in South Africa, and that's the reality, that the banks now have control of these. And whilst they don't directly run the world in terms of they come on the TV and say this country is doing this, that country is doing that. That all, of course, happens sort of behind the scenes, really. And they basically say, well, we're not going to tell you what to do exactly, but you must pay back this money. So the governments will then go away and work out what they want to do to raise money to pay back the bankers. And of course, I'm oversimplifying it rather a lot.
Yeah.
But going back to what you said about the taxes, I mean, anybody that's listening in the comments can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was one of the reasons they created income tax, was to pay back bankers' loan interest. I think certainly in one of the countries, that's why they created income tax. I think
that was America, basically.
It may well have been. And of course, there's that famous thing that income tax law has never been properly, gone through the legal system in the US. So the income tax is voluntary.
It needed, I believe, it needed so many states to ratify the bill, and they never did.
That's right.
This is in Zeitgeist. Yeah. If anyone's ever watched Zeitgeist, he covers this quite well. Basically, it's completely illegal, kind of like the Coronavirus Act now, that kind of hasn't passed through the House of Lords. It's completely illegal. Yet people are giving 25%. They effectively work 3 months a year for the taxman. And all that tax is doing is it's paying off the interest on the loans that the government are taking from the banks. It's this kind of perpetual cycle of debt, because that's all this system can create is just debt. There's no other outcome, really.
That's right, and that's why the film was called that. This Money is Debt film, which is, I think it'll be on YouTube and whatnot. So it is a slavery system. It's a slavery based on the idea that they have all the cards, and they can then dictate, the value of your cards, and they can just say, well, you've got this much money, and we've got this much money, so, we have control over you, and that's essentially the end result of that system. At the end of the day, I mean, it may not look like that, just in your everyday life. You have a job, and you get paid for doing that job, and it's easy to just see it, as a trade between you, the company that employs you, or the business or the organization, and yourself. But actually, it's not that simple. You're part of obviously part of a larger system. And in fact, going back to this idea of, because I didn't really twig that they're actually able to create money out of thin air. I didn't really twig that until probably 10, 15 years ago. And there was a lady that was doing stuff there, Veronica Chapman, and she actually sent a Freedom of Information request. Maybe I can dig it out off the shelf if I can find it, because she put it in her book. And she sent a Freedom of Information request to the Bank of England, and she asked them basically something along the lines of, "Can you explain to me how you create, how you do that? What is this quantitative easing? Because that would become a term, this quantitative easing." Which has come up again fairly recently, actually. But that term came out about probably 7, 8, 9 years ago, something like that. It's the first time I heard it. When there was, I think it might have been the 2008 economic crash, actually.
Right.
When
Okay.
Crash. Yeah. So Bank of England, and that's another good point, actually. Everyone talks about the Federal Reserve, and I've probably, I've heard the same accounts that you have, Kieran, and read some of the same bits and bobs. But I actually know very little about the Bank of England. I know hardly anything about it.
But don't you think that's crazy? They regulate the money. The very reason we're the only species on this planet that pay to be here. But the fact that we do that, you'd think we'd know a bit more about where it comes from. If you go and buy yourself a new car or a TV, you do a bit of research on it. You find the background about it. Is it the right car for me? Is that house I'm going to buy the right house for me? But no one really does any research on the banks, because whilst politicians come and go, these puppets come and go all the time, these people that are above them, and I'm talking about the banks, they don't. It's the same banks, it's the same kind of institutions that are continuously there, and that's why you see agendas never change. It doesn't matter who's in power. That same country that they were going to invade or were going to bomb next, they're still going to invade, and they're still going to bomb. Whether the person you've just voted into power told you that he wouldn't do it, as soon as he's in power, they do. And war is money, essentially, and it's the biggest tool that banks have. As you said earlier, they're always backing both sides. Someone mentioned earlier in the comments, it happened at Waterloo, and that's absolutely right. Just before the Battle of Waterloo, I'm a bit of a boffin on Waterloo. I used to love Sharp. If you remember Sean Bean in Sharp.
Oh, I remember that. I didn't watch it, but I remember it.
Yeah. That kind of was a gateway into learning a lot about the Napoleonic War. But so it happened there. So what happened was Rothschild sent out a bunch of fake news that Wellington had lost to Napoleon. So everybody panicked. The stocks fell. They were being sold off for dirt cheap, everyone was withdrawing all their money, really panicking. And then on the actual day of the battle, of course, Wellington won, and news arrived back in London that Wellington had won. And during that kind of lapse time between thinking he'd lost and knowing he'd won, Rothschild essentially had gone out and brought all of these shares and stocks at an absolute pittance to what they were worth because people were panic selling. And when the news came back that he'd won, obviously confidence was regained, and the stocks and the shares slowly started to rise. And that really is how Rothschild gained power in England, in the UK. And I think it was him that said, he cares not who rules a country; it's whoever controls the money supply really runs the country. And these are quotes that we need to listen to because they're telling you they're telling you that's what they're doing.
Well, sometimes they do rub your face in it, don't they? So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and that what you mentioned is reminding me because that was in the Janet Ossebaard sequel to The Fall of Cabal, which is a strange title. I wish she called it Rise of the Cabal because that's what she's talking about, really.
Yeah,
she called it sequel to Fall of the Cabal, which I thought was a bit of a duff title.
Should be prequel, really. What happened before.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, regardless of that, it's a minor thing. But yeah, that's the Napoleon stuff that you just said. It's funny because I only just heard about that a couple of weeks ago when I was watching that video. So that's it. They play all these tricks, and they encourage us to sort of put value on these promissory notes. That's another thing. And these groups are they're international. They're not generally based in a single country. Of course, we've already talked about banking centres like London being a big banking centre, but then of course we can think of all these Swiss bank accounts, and there's certain things going on there. So there are obviously banking centres around the world, like Frankfurt, I believe, is meant to be another big banking centre, isn't it? And so it used to be. But these, as you were saying, they're not really elected. They might be elected by shareholders, but they're not elected. We don't know who they are.
No.
So this stuff is all, and like I said, it's just going on at the Bilderberg conference. So as you were saying, if you're wondering why stuff never changes or it's always moving in the same direction, then it's because the people behind the governments who are loaning them money, who have got control through debt slavery, they're dictating the policy.
Yeah,
and they're dictating the general direction, and this has been going on for centuries now, hasn't it? If we go back again to the Knights Templars, and then you can get into the more sort of controversial areas of the Khazarians, and where they became the sort of Jewish bankers. Came out of the Khazarian Empire. Again, that's all in that Janet Ossebaard thing.
You mentioned there about how they are international, and that's absolutely right, and that's why we see agendas as we're going through now played out worldwide. That's why you don't just get one country really that's kind of doing something a bit weird. Of course, you get like your communist countries like Korea and China that have always been a bit different to us, but the general kind of the Western population, that's why all these countries always follow the same agenda. Whatever they're doing in Germany will eventually happen here. Whatever we're doing will eventually happen in France, and it's because the people pushing the agenda are interconnected throughout everything, really. Before I want to start talking about cashless society, really, for the last part of the show, but I do feel it's fair. We've had a shed load of comments. I feel it's fair to give a shout out to some of them and answer some questions. So thanks everyone for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Adrian Clegg, hi Andrew, hi Kieran, hi Aid. Hope you're doing well, mate. Hope you're enjoying my book that I sent you. Stephen Bamber, they did the same at the Battle of Waterloo. Absolutely, yeah. We've just spoken about that. Alex Forbes, hi Alex. Am I right in thinking that's why JFK was killed? Yep. Andrew touched on that earlier. Joanne Pugh, hi Joanne. Yep, Bilderberg, absolutely. Really, really interesting, the Bilderberg meetings. If anyone can go and research that. Maxine Goff, hi, how you doing, Maxine? Marty, what's your opinion, if any, on Alex Jones and his infiltration of Bohemian Grove? Bohemian Grove. So really, this is where they all get in front of a fire, in front of a big wooden building of Moloch or whatever the owl is supposed to be. And supposedly, again, presidents, people of power, prime ministers, actors. Didn't Tom Cruise go there or something?
I don't know. Yeah, he
And
might well have done.
and they all go there and they worship what looks like a child's kind of model or something
They have
in
a
front
mock
of
sacrifice ritual,
yeah,
don't they?
mock
According to that
sacrifice in front
video
of
that was shot.
that's it. And that was by Alex Jones when he broke
Yeah,
into
well, the
Bohemian Grove.
interesting thing about that was that the person that got him in was John Ronson, the journalist.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so and he's dodgy as John Ronson. I sort of had a run in with him about 2006 on our 9/11 forum.
Yeah.
So he's one of these journalists that kind of writes about quote unquote conspiracy topics.
But you think he's kind of involved and tied in?
I think he's basically controlled, not opposition, but he's controlled. Because he got access to talking to people like Dennis Seeley, the Labour MP, and Ronson seemed to have some fairly high up connections.
Yeah.
And that's how he got into. That's how apparently it was. He got in with Alex Jones into Bohemian Grove, and they filmed that video, which went round, been doing around the rounds ever since. But I think it was about 2003 they got in there.
Yeah.
So it was a while ago.
Marty, yeah, you're absolutely right there. It's the theme of the elites and this hidden control, this hidden hand. It'll be the same people that will go to the Bilderberg group. It's the same people that are effectively running the world behind the puppets that we see on TV every day. Alex, what are your thoughts on cryptocurrency? We'll get to that in a minute, Alex. We're going to talk about cashless society in a sec. Maybe the powers that be think this monetary system is done with, and they are preparing for a global economic reset. All ties in with the COVID stuff. Absolutely, we keep hearing about the Great Reset at the moment, Andrew. That keeps
absolutely, yeah. Well, maybe we'll go to do that at the end, or talk a bit more about the end. Yeah. Go on and go on the cashless society, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cashless, Jesus. I remember when this COVID thing first started back in, it would have been about January, February. When people were dropping down flat on their face in China.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Still never seen that happen here. That when that was going around, I was sat at the bar. I don't know if you can remember what that is, but it's this place that sells alcohol. Yeah. And you used to be able to sit at the bar. Amazing it was. And I was sat there, and I was one of those guys that would just perch.
You could get a sandwich as well, couldn't you?
You could get a carb. You could get anything. It was, honestly, scratchings.
Didn't it was great. Crisps as well.
It was great. And and you'd sit there, and I'd anyone that came to the bar, I'd talk to and have a laugh with. And this one lady started talking about what was going on, and I said, this is going to head towards a cashless society. And she laughed at me and she went, "You're an absolute nutter." She said, "That's far too conspiracy for me." And off she went. Anyway, when the pubs were allowed to reopen for a bit a couple of months ago, we weren't allowed to sit at the bar anymore. So I was sat away from the bar, and she just happened to come past. And when she went to the bar and she went to pay, and the guy said, No. He said, card. And she went, "I've only got cash." And as she walked past me, it took everything in me to bite my tongue and not say to her, "What did I tell you, Sarah? What did I tell you?" Because, you can just see it coming. And the thing is with cashless society is, in my opinion, the headline of cashless society is control. It's all about control, because they can see where you're spending your money. No, you can't go and do little foreigners for your friends anymore. Children can't have tough fairy money. They can tax every single thing that you earn. No backhanders. And they can take money from you at any given chance. And this leads us on to universal income, which we'll probably talk about in a minute. But, this universal income that they keep talking about now. But, I mean, what are your thoughts on cashless society? Because for me, it's evil.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I'm guilty of using cashless transactions, probably slightly more than some people. So it's kind of one of those things you kind of fall into doing it if, unless you're really, because I've always worked with technology since I was a teenager, and that's been my profession. So for somebody like me, the idea of using a contactless card is quite a natural progression of technology through 30 odd years. but you are then slowly, and I'm aware of this, but I still don't do it enough. You are slipping into this matrix. You're being snared in the matrix by saying, "Oh well, it's all very convenient just to swipe this card," and then it just gets debited from your account. And I suppose my sort of general, I'm going off the point slightly, but not too much, is that if I can get in and out of that shop quickly, and then I can just like literally go back and spend more time researching stuff, then I'd perhaps rather spend the time researching stuff than I would fumbling with cash, sort of thing, And that's maybe not the right attitude, because again, you're buying into the system, or I'm sort of fueling that system. And I'm not gonna lie about that, but I still do use cash myself, and like you say, I think the primary reason for them wanting to promote it, because of course setting up the infrastructure for that sort of thing is a costly business.
Yep.
For setting up all the bloody the bloody card reading machines at every till. And now you can buy card reading machines, and that technology has all got to be developed. And then, of course, those card reading machines have got to talk to servers, which are meant to be secure. So you've got to set up a communications grid that's secure and can have cybersecurity built into it and stuff like that. You've got to have a robust power system so that the machines actually work, and power on, and the batteries don't run out and things like that. And all that technology, and I've been involved in developing communications technology, not specifically for credit card systems. So they have a big investment in this now. And of course, it's been sold to us on the basis of speed and convenience. And this, again, is another trap that you fall into generally in life. If something's speedy and convenient, you're more likely to do it. Whereas, maybe I should be just more chilled out, and I should just take things, slower and more a regular pace, rather than trying to rush through everything, which is what I'm guilty of doing. So these are the ways psychologically that you get hooked into this cashless society model. But at the end of the day, if you're giving somebody £40 by swiping a card, or giving them by cash, you're still giving them £40. So from that basis, the cashless thing doesn't really have any. It doesn't really have any value other than saving time. It's not.
No, but the thing is, with the time, as you just said yourself, you rush through things.
Yeah.
That's the society that we're in. You go to a city and no one has time to live. You're in rush hour. Everyone's rushing to get to a job that they hate. Then everyone's rushing to get home to a family that they hate. And it's just no one has time to live anymore. And that's, you're right, that these people that push these agendas, they know what makes us tick. And they have like the behavioural societies and stuff like that, and they know what makes us tick. And this ease of use. And someone's mentioned there, again, Marty talks about these Apple Watches, and I know a guy who he's got a card on his phone now, so he pays with his phone, and they look at you as if to say, yeah, look at me, man, I'm cool, and it's like, yeah, but are you? like it's not that cool. It's not that trendy to be doing what you're doing. There's much cooler things to be doing, but that's where they get you. It's this kind of, it's a fashion statement to be able to pay with contactless. Beep, done, and it's they walk off it with a bit of swagger, thinking that they're cool.
That's it. And I think there's like a general thing in that. We've talked about the COVID scam. And people have become invested in the COVID scam, and I think we talked last time about it being a cult. Yeah. But you could also say that we're all part of a cash cult, if you see, or not so much a cash cult, but their trading system. They set it up, and to function in society, we don't have to, of course, but the vast majority of us are invested in that system, which is works to their advantage. And like you were saying before, if we want to buy a house, a very small number of us have actually got our own resources and funds that we could exchange for a house. We have to go to a bank, so that's all mediated by a bank. So we're then, beholden to their system, their system and their way of doing things. So that is a form of slavery.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah.
And so we typically do become debt slaves, and it is a slavery system. It's a techno slavery system, and of course, then we could start talking about the technocrat movement and all of that as a separate thing,
Yeah.
But
I was just sorry. I was just going to say there that the thing is with cash is people are pointing out here that cash doesn't leave a trace. And that's
right.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
People spend online; they know exactly where you've been. I laughed because there was a guy who came in the pub again when we were allowed in, and he said, "I'm not giving you my name and number," and then paid with card. I thought, well, they know you've been here now anyway because you've just paid with your card. And of course, they can. I don't know if you watch that program on TV, Hunted or whatever it's called, where these people have to they let off out into the country and they're tracked down by professional hunters. And if they manage to escape for so long, they win money. But one way that they track them is by looking at have they spent money in particular places. Can we trace their cards? Can we trace their phone calls? And that's what cashless is all about. And of course, it pushes you to buying online as well, which kills the high street, which they're doing everything in their absolute power to do at the moment. So everyone buys online, which again, just like the banks we spoke about, it's all tracked. It monopolizes the sellers. So we've got Amazon. So instead of 10 independent shops, it's just Amazon.
Yeah.
And that's what cashless society is all about. And then we come on to the universal income. And people think this is great. It's a socialist's dream to sit on your ass and get money for nothing, really. But I've got news for you. It ain't great, because the second you become reliant on a basic income and you think, oh, that means I can reduce my hours because I get X amount from and they're talking about this now. This isn't a conspiracy. I read a headline yesterday. They're actually talking about this now. And what it means is every person in the UK will get, I don't know, let's make it up, £1,000 a month. Really, whether you're working or not, you just get £1,000 a month. But what that means is you're beholden to the government. You're a prisoner and they're giving you scraps of food. And at any point they want, they can take those scraps of food away and you starve. So if you rely on that £1,000, but you were out protesting the weekend, social crediting system, that's 10 points off you. You're only going to get £900 this month.
Yeah.
Or you were caught speeding, or, you were caught sitting at the bar eating a cob and having a pint.
After 9 o'clock.
After 9 o'clock, or 6 o'clock now in Wales.
Yeah.
So that we're going to take £600 off you now. So it's what's going on in China, and it's what will happen here. The way they're trying to push it.
It's already happening, isn't it? Essentially, you can argue that the furlough scheme was a
trial
kind of rollout of not exactly universal credits. It's not universal, but I haven't been furloughed. I still work. I still get paid by the university. And so it's all been trialed, and I think the furloughing scheme it could be seen as a precursor.
Do you think that? Do you think that it's although they're calling it the furlough scheme and it's for whatever reason? Do you think essentially there is an ulterior motive, and it's to get people used to?
It's a government handout. I thought that from day one. That I hadn't really looked at the universal credit thing, but I'd certainly it's obvious that this is a government handout. And again, you think, well, where's all that money coming from? And again, I'm digressing a little bit, but not too much, because it does go back to the bankers. Because somebody sent me this thing about Qantas Airlines that wanting to have mandatory vaccinations before they're allowing people to travel.
Yeah.
And I think they're now sort of going through the motions of that, or they've put something out about they're going to do it like 2 months, 3 months, whatever, 6 months after Christmas. I don't know what the time scale is, but this ain't going to be popular with customers. This is not going to be popular at all. So I'm thinking, well, why would an airline, a big airline like that, want to put this out? Why would they want to float this idea? And there can only be one reason, really. It's not. They're not worried about going bust. They can't be worried about going bust, because obviously the whole industry is completely trashed at the minute. So why would they do it when their industry is trashed? They surely want to wait a few months till it recovers a bit and then try it. But no, so they must be being bankrolled. That's what I said. They must be being bankrolled, and so the government, UK government, to give all this money out for furlough schemes and all the other things, they're being bankrolled. So this is the bankers, and this I think goes back to a question that came up in the chat box. Where is all this money coming from to do all this stuff? And it's all across the world. It's all across the world. Where is all this money coming from? Amounts of money like we've never seen ever in the history of the world have been, brought into this scheme of things in the last 6 to 9 months. So this looks like they're priming for this great reset in that they're running it. And then somebody said this, somebody who knows more about this than me, and I can't remember who it was, but they're running out the fiat currency system. Apparently, according to their models or whoever does this, the fiat currency system will only work up to a point, and then you can't use it anymore. It's just it runs its course, and that's
so it's almost like
it's
almost like the last day of holiday. You've still got €600 left to burn, and you're not going to take any back with you. You're going to go out and just blow it all on crap.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. So this is them blowing out, all they can with the system, because they're going to switch to this. And maybe this, again, ties into this cryptocurrency system. Yeah. Because, again, we've got that patent that came out with this 666 in the patent number. I forget. And it basically, what it is, it's linked to some cryptocurrency system, and it links it to human biological activity or something, doesn't it? I don't know if you've seen this patent which will come out.
I've heard of the patent, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a Microsoft patent that was filed, I don't know, in 2015 or something. There may be somebody in the who's listening who can search for the details. But and they said, people have read this and said, yeah, well, this is the Matrix, because what they're saying is that somehow they've got this system where they can link into your brain. Your brain will be doing some mental activity which has credit value, and then the system will then look at that and then automatically increment your Bitcoin funds because of what's happened in your brain, and it's something along those lines. And you can kind of see that now. If we're all bloody working at home and doing what we're doing now, just bloody interacting with each other through a computer, and we're generating some kind of value from that, then you can do the whole thing inside a computerized system. You don't need to have a physical meeting or anything.
No.
So the next logical thing is not to have the video link up or the audio link up. You just do it through a network of neurons, and brains just become this resource within the Matrix, just like in the film, or very similar to what's in the film.
Yeah.
And again, that I think is what the technocrats, that's their system that they wanted to develop and have tried to develop in various ways. So maybe joining those two things together, we're going from the fiat currency system to this like cryptocurrency or cyber currency, totally mediated through online systems where you're actually linked into them. So you're just sat in your chair with your brain doing things, and your brain then becomes another server, for some other services that are going on elsewhere. And and then that's where it links into all the 5G, because that's why they need all the 5G. To run the transfer, to run all that system and interface with things like driverless cars and all the other,
the Internet of Things.
And exactly, and not only that, but there's a paper that was published, I think it was earlier this year, and I thought I'd misread it at first, misread the title, and it's called Internet of Bodies.
Yes.
Yeah. And I thought, bodies, what do they mean, bodies? I thought it was Internet of Things, but they don't. What they mean is human bodies. They don't even call it Internet of Humans or Internet of People. They call it Internet of Bodies.
They've taken away that I don't know what the word is, but not the personification, but the kind of the intimacy, I guess. And,
they've taken away the human element. It's dehumanized. So they just call it. You just become a cadaver. That's actually not dead, but you don't have a soul. Your soul is now gone. And you just become a processing factory that happens to be organic.
Which is the Matrix all over. Where the AI is feeding off your body because it gives off an electric current basically, and that like a big battery, and that's how they make their money. Right, we've got about 30 seconds left or so. I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. That's been to say, Andrew, that was a topic we didn't know much about. We managed to talk for an hour pretty well. And we've had some fantastic interaction from the people watching.
Yeah, it's good.
So thank you very much. I know we're going out to about 5 different groups tonight. Thanks to Karen for sorting all of that. Also, a big shout out, and I'm sure Andrew will join me here, to Truth Seekers Northeast. Maureen Waters has asked me to give a shout out to Truth Seekers Northeast. Head over to their page on Facebook because it's a great truthers page, really. And when they get up and running again, they meet in Newcastle. Myself and Andrew have given talks there. They have great people on giving presentations, and they're a fantastic bunch of people. So I said I'd do it. So there you go, Maureen. Shout out to you guys. Thank you, Karen, for putting this on, sharing us around the groups. I can't do much sharing at the minute because I'm still serving my 3-month Facebook ban, so I can't do much with groups and pages, unfortunately. But yeah, thank you for tuning in, Andrew. Thank you very much for coming on, as always. And I think your name is that going to be your website? I can't tell because
it goes off. It's just check the evidence. Yeah.
Yeah. So checktheevidence.com. Is it .com?
Correct.
Yep, so checktheevidence.com is Andrew's website. You can find a bunch of his research there. Fantastic website on COVID, on anything really, going back to what we spoke about last time on the solar system and stuff like that. A lot of your books are free PDFs on there as well, so go and check that out. And so thanks guys, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.